So here is me showing how I fixed several different issues with the photos that I had. So this first one was super overexposed to the point where I couldn't completely fix all of it. So the website was being very laggy. So I decided to crop out some of the really bad overexposure at the top. And just brought down the exposure, up the contrast, and brought down the highlights a little bit just to try and reduce it a little bit. Added a little bit more shadow in there, and then I used the masking tool to just work on that bit of the knee that was super overexposed. So tried bringing down the highlights, that just kind of made it look a bit grey. So I tried cropping to fix it again, and that just didn't have the same effect of the shot that I wanted. This photo was a little bit, some of it was kind of beyond saving, and that is my own issue there, that I sort of let the light meter get a little bit out of control while taking this one, but I tried to save it as best as I could. So I cropped to the best of my ability just to get rid of as much of that white part as I could, while still keeping the original shot, and so showing the original and the current one there, just flicking between them, and that was the best that I could do with that. So this one is fixing the redness on the subject's forehead. So when I'd edited the rest of the photo, it turned out looking really red, and he looked a bit sunburnt. So I used the mask tool, and then lowered the saturation on just this forehead mask to make it look less burnt and red. And also lowered the temperature a little bit just to kind of combat that a little bit. So if that will load, that was the original, that was the current one. I think I went in with a little bit more masking. Yeah, I did. Just to combat it a little bit more because it was very red. And just lower the saturation even more. So it was just finding the balance between getting rid of that redness and making sure it didn't look grey there. So I upped it a little bit more there because it started going a little bit grey. Reduced the temperature a little bit more as well, and that fixed it quite well. So this one was to add a background blur to this photo, because I used low aperture on all of the photos, but some of them, because of how close to the background the person was, didn't blur properly. So to draw more attention to the subject in this photo, I wanted to use the background blur feature on Lightroom. So I just applied that and let it load, and then I had some issues with the definition on the edges of the person. So I tried a couple of things to sort that out, but I think it was just because I used too strong of a blur. So I just lowered it down a little bit so that kind of divide between the background and foreground was much less pronounced, and less noticeable when you look at it from far away. And I think this background blur effect kind of adds, it draws your attention more to the subject and kind of adds that sense of you're that much closer emotionally to the person. So I think, and then just adjusted some of the, I think that's the redness in his hair a little bit, because it turned out very red after I'd adjusted the colours, and just toned down that pinkness a little bit and cropped it in ever so slightly, just to adjust that framing and make you feel like you're a bit close to the person. So this was another fixing redness, because again the subject had very red skin after editing, so I think it was lagging here, but I was just looking at how to fix this. So I used the mask tool again and just drew around where it was really red and where I needed to adjust it, which was just kind of forehead and eyebrows, and I wanted to leave the rest so it would blend nicely. And so his whole face wouldn't look super like overdone while the rest of it looked really natural. So I just drew around that, and then I think while I was waiting for it to load, just adjusted the saturation again just to bring it down a little bit. So when I went to around -20 it looked a bit grey, so I went to I think around -15. I ended up settling around there. I was just testing how far I could go with that. Oh, it was more than I remember it being. Oh no, I did settle around -15, just to bring that redness down, but to make sure that his skin still looked like lifelike and stuff. Because there's nothing worse than making someone look grey in a photo. So that was showing that fix. It just made sure his skin looked nice and even, and there wasn't big red patches from the saturation. So this is fixing a very, very underexposed photo, and I found through this project I learned that underexposed photos are much easier to save than overexposed ones. So I just did this first by just bringing up the exposure quite a lot, upping the contrast, and then increasing the shadows, so there was less sort of pronounced shadows, and bringing down the highlights a little bit so everything kind of melded together a bit better and looked a lot smoother. Then brought up the black point a little bit, just so the whole thing was brighter, and that made a massive difference. Initially took it from looking super cloudy and overcast to looking like it was taken on a summer's day. So I turned the tint up to +10 a little bit, which is what I did for all of these photos, so it gave the skin a nice pink glow. I adjusted the vibrance more rather than the saturation throughout all of these photos, because that reduces it looking super oversaturated in certain places. It's a much more gentle way to turn up that saturation and make it look more vibrant without all the nasty lines that you get. So there I am, just adjusting the pinkness in the skin, just making it a little bit less pronounced. And I adjusted the colour of the grass and the trees in the background and just made the green a lot more green, and adjusted the saturation of it a little bit, because some of the grass was a bit yellow. So then I think I used a background mask here, because I thought the background and the trees was a little bit too dark. Oh no, sorry, it was for the wrong way around. It was for the subject of it. So I thought she was still a little bit dark and didn't stand out from the background very well. So I just used a mask on her and just kind of brought her a little bit lighter, and I really like the way that one turned out. And then just cropped it in a little bit more, just to again make you feel a little bit closer to the subject and just improve the framing and composition a little bit. I also sharpened these images just a little bit, because I think it adds a nice sharp look to them, and it makes them just look that little bit better. But they were well focused anyway, so it doesn't add too much of a difference, but it just makes sure that those details like hair and stuff like that look really nice. So this is another very underexposed one, but the main issue with this one is with the background. So the subject here was relatively well exposed, but the background was really, really dark. So I fixed this by increasing the shadows and the black point in it, so that anything that was already dark would be lightened up a lot. So that's a big difference anyway, from that original to how it looked there. Up the exposure and the contrast and everything, just to make it look more professional and a little bit more cinematic almost. Reduce the white point and the highlights, just to make sure I wasn't getting super pale white areas when I up the saturation, and then adding that tint again just to give the skin a nice pink glow. Upping the vibrance just to make the colours in the books and her hair stand out more, and a little bit of saturation, but not too much. And then I think I'm changing the tone of her hair ever so slightly there, to be a bit more true to life, because in these photos after editing it turned out looking really, really red, and her hair isn't red in real life, so I just adjusted that a little bit, brought out the purple at the front of her hair a bit more so that looked a bit more striking, and again adjusted the colour of the trees in the background so it was more green. So at this point I still thought the background was a bit too dark. There were too many shadows in it, so I used the mask feature again to create a background mask and just raise the shadows in the background a lot more so everything looks more evenly lit and really nice and summery, and that's a big difference from the original to the current photo. She looks a lot more lifelike and the background is much more lifelike as well. So I'm just cropping it there to align one of her eyes with the third line and just adjust the framing a little bit. And that was the original compared to the current photo. So I think this is the last one here. I was just reducing the amount of yellowness that came up after the initial edit on this subject. So his skin turned very yellow on his cheek, so I just used the mask feature, made a mask over that area and then reduced the temperature ever so slightly. This was a bit of a game of trial and error, but just reduced the temperature and added more of a pink tint rather than a yellow one to the skin there, and just messed around with how far I could push that to see if that would make a difference, and that was a big improvement. And I also brightened that area of the face up ever so slightly because that was the side of his face that was towards the sun, so it made sense for it to be a little bit brighter. So I think then I tried to adjust the hue of it a little bit for a bit more sort of pinpoint adjusting, but some of that turned out to be a little bit too strong. So just messing around with the saturation, just increasing the pink tint rather than the yellow one, and that has massively reduced that. And I also had a little bit of that tint and some overexposure on the knee there, so I used a similar trick, made a mask, and just I missed a little bit there, so I just added that, and just adjusted the temperature and tint and saturation and stuff like that so the skin looked more pink instead of yellow. I didn't like that effect and that wasn't what I was going for with it, so I wanted all of the photos to have a consistent sort of pinky tone to the skin, because it made everyone look more lifelike and added to that kind of youthful look that I was going for. So there I am again, just messing with the hue. Again, that was a little bit too much for what I was going for. I was looking for a much more subtle adjustment, which I found in just messing with the tint and the temperature of that specific area of the photo. So just up the saturation just a little bit to kind of cancel out that yellowness, and I think that was that problem pretty much fixed. The skin tone there is a lot more even. I just decided to adjust the amount of the mask on the face because it still looked a little bit yellow, but unfortunately Lightroom on the web is very, very laggy, so I had to wait for quite a while to get it to show the actual differences, and then I went back to the initial adjustments and adjusted the light a little bit more, just to fit with how it looked now, and adjusted the amounts of the masks again just to cancel the yellow on the skin. And that left everything else nice and saturated without having that sort of unpleasant look on the skin.